All right, so I'm going to be responding to Stephen's Rationality Rules' idea that there shouldn't be a second referendum. Now, let me just first state that on the issue of Brexit, I'm an American citizen. I can't vote in that referendum. I don't live in the UK or whatever. I'm fairly neutral as to the outcome of the election. I don't really care one way or the other. To me, the European Union does some crazy shit that I'm not fond of. UCD and Article 9, I think, is way of their human rights code goes way overboard, protecting people's feelings and sensibilities that they have no right to. I mean, they don't have a right to be protected from being offended. That's not a human right. And the UK has a similar position on that. And so, unless they don't, and it's an EU thing, then maybe I support the Britain leaving. But for the majority, the core things that I would really care about promoting and seeing in the world are not going to change, whether or not the Britain stays or leaves. The next point is that I think Stephen might need to at least know partly where I'm coming from, should he ever see this video. Basically, because there is a bit of a US-UK divide, because I'm not sure how often referendums of this sort of Brexit are held, or how often referendums in general are held in the UK. But in the US, they're fairly often. But they're not really called referendums. They're called either propositions. They're propositions, ballot measures, ballot initiatives, etc. What these are, we either vote on constitutional amendments, city budget proposals for city property tax increases for the city, and I think the county too. Then there's what is it? The state, at least the state of Texas, they do a two-step process for amending the Texas Constitution. They vote the 2/3 majority of, pretty sure, both houses, and then the people ratify it in that next general election in November, which would be this November, January 2019. I mean, not January, November 2019. And also, in some states, you can get, if you get enough signatures, ballot initiative, you can get a measure, you can get something either repealed or a new bill entirely passed. You gather the requisite number of signatures for that area, for whatever type of bill you want passed. And then you turn those signatures in, they're verified. When they're verified, whatever thing you're wanting on the ballot gets put on the ballot. Now, I think if it's not something that should be put on the ballot, like it's something that shouldn't be determined by a popular vote, the courts can step in and shut it down. But like the California Supreme Court did when there was a ballot measure to split California up into 6 states. Now, I don't think they had to do that, because even if that ballot measure passed, the procedure for breaking a state up into multiple states cannot be decided by a popular referendum, because the state has to first then relinquish the land, which means the California legislature would then decide it, then it would go to Congress because Congress has to admit new states. I think it was kind of a pointless measure, but maybe they just wanted to save the paper. But yeah, so generally, I'm in favor of a very much objective process for calling these referendums, that should enough signatures be gathered, a referendum must take place. Out of the question, it must take place. The British Parliament should decide the parameters by which a referendum should take place, but once those parameters are met, it must take place and it will be binding. Because, you know, as Stephen also mentioned, that the referendum, the Brexit referendum, wasn't really binding. I honestly think it should be. There should be a binding thing put in place. Maybe Richard Dawkins' 2/3 majority for certain very important measures or controversial measures that could really divide people. Again, there needs to be an objective metric in place to determine that. I don't know if there could be, but if they can find some objective metric, or if it's determined by the courts, whatever, but some sort of metric, objective, to determine when a referendum will happen and the rules surrounding such a referendum. That should be objective. Now, I don't know if I mentioned his core argument, but I'll restate it. His core argument is that the people voted, they voted to leave. We have to leave now. Pretty simple. And that, you know, if the British Parliament were to call a second referendum and we leave, and that second referendum says to remain, and so we remain, then that is a breach of democracy, and that democracy itself is threatened. Well, do we think that about when that happens with, I would say that's not the case. Because think about it. What really is a referendum? Referendums is basically making the people the legislative body. People become the lawmakers in that sort of a sense. So when a governmental body, like when a legislature, starts a process and the people don't like it, the people voted in these legislators in the first place. They wanted them to be in power. Or they at least said, at least I'm fine with these guys being in power, because I trust these guys better than the others. But then let's say they do, and maybe they do something that you're in favor of at first. They start the process, but it's a lengthy process. It spans multiple years. The people spoke, they wanted these people in power. And so the people in power are doing what they promised they were going to do. They've started the process of doing what they promised they were going to do. But then public opinion turns, and so election rolls by. An election rolls by, and then the opposition party wins the election. And they scrap And then when they get into power, they scrap the process. They say, nope, we're not doing this anymore. We are canceling this process. We're doing our own thing. We're not doing what the opposition party was wanting to do. Would that be a breach of democracy? No, that wouldn't. Because the people changed their mind, and when the new election came up, they made it apparent, and they put different people in power. Notice how they're not really using. Stephen completely ignores this point. Because, yeah, people voted this way in that election, but that doesn't mean they're going to vote necessarily the same way in another election. And that's really is. So now let's take the same principle and apply it to the situation at hand. And let's examine this in the perspective of the charge being given to the people as legislators of the largest legislative body in Great Britain that there ever can be. All right, so the people, certain people, there was a cry for number of the people to call, a number of people called for a referendum, whether to leave or remain. The Prime Minister indulged them, gave them the referendum. And the people voted. If enough people, sufficient to call another referendum, speak up, and another referendum is held, how is that debasing democracy? That is, and after a few years, that is literally the definition of we swept in one party into power, then a few years later, we sweep the opposition party. The people sweep the opposition party into power because I don't want what's happening. There is literally no difference. Well, slightly. Well, not really, at least in the UK context, because in the UK, the government can call for referendums as much, can call for snap elections when they need to. It's at their full discretion. In the US, you can't do that. But you can, in a number of places, do ballot initiatives, which is the same sort of thing. And you can call ballot initiatives whenever you want, so long as you get the required number of signatures. Now, I am in favor of that sort of a regulation on the referendum thing. As I mentioned, I'm pretty sure I mentioned that. But yeah, I can forget some of the things I've said. I'm a bit ADHD, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. But essentially the point is this. The more elections, the more democracy. I don't see any problem with a second, third, fourth, fifth referendum, so long as it meets an objective standard of hey, a lot of people want a referendum to happen. Now, of course, then if it's like only a few thousand and a number of thousand don't want to, I think there should definitely be a now whether you want to have a counter ballot initiative movement to where you can, hey, if you have more signatories against the against putting it on the ballot than want it on the ballot, I think that would also be a fine way to go about it. Again, I think there should be passed into law a referendum law making these decisions binding, but allowing for second referendums, because just like the people will get a second referendum whenever new election is held, parliaments and legislatures have second votes all the fucking time, as they keep trying to introduce, hey, if their idea got voted down the last time, they can still reintroduce it. They can still reintroduce their legislation, keep trying again, keep trying to argue in favor of it, get more and more legislators in support of it, and hey, and one day it just might pass. It just might pass one day. And that is called the democratic process. You can keep trying as much as you like. It might not happen. No one's saying that you're not going to get what you want to happen. Because this is a democracy, this is multiple people. Multiple people don't share your exact view. But you still get to keep trying. You can keep trying. And if you have enough support behind your idea, and a referendum is what was agreed to before, there should be a referendum on your thing. But again, there should be an objective process behind calling these referendums, because the objective process will help weed out a lot of referendums, so that, hey, if it doesn't meet the requisite number of signatures, if it doesn't have the requisite number of support, or another possibly novel idea, I don't know if this exists in the US, but if a greater number of signatories is against the measure, then it won't be put on the ballot. And that's a fine idea that the British Parliament should entertain. But yeah, on the fundamental point that more elections that repeal the previous elections results is detrimental to democracy, then I don't think you have a too good of an understanding of what democracy truly is. Because democracy is the people at the time deciding how they want to rule their lives. The more referendums, the better. The thing is, having referendums too much isn't necessarily feasible. That's why you don't really do them. But that's a question of practicality, not democracy. Democracy is the people speak. And I believe Thomas Paine had a great quote in responding to a Brit who had a very distasteful view of the French Revolution. And was very fond of this old English constitution, which said that the people, basically what happened is this document said that it bound the people of Britain now to forever. And so Thomas Paine pointed out, what right, hey, the people of that time had every right to bind themselves to that contract. But by what right did the people of that time bind the people of another time to it? So, and with Brexit, the people have decided they wanted to leave. The government fulfilled And the government basically fulfilled their end of the bargain. They enacted Article 50, the leaving process. Should another referendum intervene to say, actually, we don't want to leave? That's not breaking of democracy. That is, we wanted this, but we've changed our minds. That is the whole idea of democracy, that you change your minds. We don't vote for one election and then that's it. That's the government we have forever. No more elections. You can't have any more referendums. Or not until the current government dies or whatever. Not until that there's or an official dies, and then you get to vote when the government dies. But not until then. No, there's elections on a regular basis. And again, there should be objective standards to when an out of the blue referendum happens, so that reason when there's enough support, when there is enough support to when there should be another referendum, that it will happen. That isn't, I don't know, this is kind of, I've been rambling a little bit. Don't know how much sense I made. I'm pretty sure I got my point across though. Happy for you to make a response. I'll watch it. I quite welcome it, because Stephen, I do fully respect you, and I love watching your debunked series. This one, I took issue with not any of the really arguments, just the main crux of it I took issue with. Everything else, pretty much, I thought you really got right. This is me. The lights are off. I could have turned them on, but I felt like, they've been off for this video for a while. Why turn them on? All right, well, bye.